the DA has indicated that it will challenge the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. Parliament has passed the bill whose provision that grade R will now be the new compulsory school starting level is among the issues that sparked robust debate. The bill also provides for the formal punishment of parents who fail to enrol their children from grade R. It confirms that corporal punishment is no longer allowed at schools and that those found guilty of implementing it must be penalised. The DA is among the opposition parties that have criticised the bill, saying it takes away the rights of school governing bodies to make decisions on admissions and language policies. We are joined by Professor of Education Policy at Wits University, Professor Brahm Fleisch, for more on this. A very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News. All right, so we are talking about this bill, and of course the DA has indeed objected, particularly to the fact that it provides that grade R will now be the new compulsory school starting level, among some of the issues that are indeed sparking robust debate. Let's talk to Prof. Fleisch. Thanks for being with us and good evening to you, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome, sir. Let's talk about your views on this Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. One would have thought that might be a good idea to start, the schooling of a child from grade R so that you already sort of have them in the system leading into grade 1. But what are your thoughts? And do you also object, as some have indeed objected?
So I certainly don't have any objections. I think there are a variety of different periods in which children start school depending on context. So in some Scandinavian countries, children start school much later. Yeah. In the UK, much earlier. So there isn't a single best practice, depending on the local norms. And it's clear that in South Africa, grade R is very popular amongst parents.
Yeah, with any change and with any policy, really, there are pros and cons. Have you looked at what some of those pros and cons would be if this were indeed to be made, into law?
So the big concern that I have is the question of the quality of the programs. About 10 years ago, at one of the research centres at Stellenbosch, there was an evaluation of the quality of grade R programs. And one of the insights was that in quintile 5 schools, children generally benefited a great deal, but in quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools, less so. So there was a question about whether, in fact, we're going to have quality education in the grade R year across the board. And I think there's no doubt that over long term, we should be focusing on improving the quality, not just of our schooling system, grade 1 to 12, but also the quality of the grade program.
Yeah. Prof, I know you're based at a university, at a tertiary institution, and there have been a lot of complaints by professors and lecturers at a tertiary level about the readiness of students coming in from matric into university. Is there a possibility that something like this, and you're talking about the long-term effects, is there a possibility that the fact that school might now be forced to start grade 1 as compulsory, can it perhaps be positive in terms of later on and in long term actually helping out for students who are then admitted into university? So we don't hear people like yourself saying there is no readiness.
So the idea is that children would learn a whole series of preschool skills. So, for example, before children become readers, they need to develop what is called phonological awareness, which is sound discrimination. They need to develop fine and gross motor coordination. So a good quality grade R would provide children with an opportunity to learn some very important underlying skills that would be necessary as they enter the formal school system in grade 1. So good programs certainly would have benefits, and it potentially has benefits most importantly for children in quintile 1 through 3 schools, which are schools serving the poorest of the poor, and children in middle class areas already being served by them, but will extend those benefits to middle class or to working class and poor children.
Yeah. I wonder if you've heard, Prof, the opposition in terms of, what they believe is the problem with the bill. The DA is among the opposition parties that are criticizing the bill, saying that it takes away the rights of school governing bodies to make a decision. Do you believe that, that submission by the DA is indeed somewhat justified?
So, I think from what I understand, the main concerns that the DA and the Freedom Front have raised was not necessarily on the grade R, but particularly around admissions policy and language policy. And currently, the legislation, school governing bodies have the legal authority, obviously within the context of the Constitution and South African law, to develop the language policy and the admissions policy. The draft legislation essentially would require that those draft policies, school policies, be approved by the head of the education departments in the provinces. And I think that the concern that's been raised is that potentially undermines local control over schools. So I don't think it's specifically related to the grade R, although there may be those concerns, but other areas where there's a feeling that the real autonomy of school governing bodies has been eroded.
But how continue. Sorry, I'll ask my question after.
My own view is that the Constitutional Court, in a number of very important rulings, essentially has clarified the extent to which governing bodies have the right to determine, for example, language policy. In a seminal case that the court heard about a decade ago, just less than a decade ago, called the Hoërskool Ermelo case, Justice Moseneke, in that decision, while he found in favor of the school, did make it clear to the school governing body at the time that they must look after not only the interests of the children currently in the school, but the broader community that the school serves. So I think the courts have been providing kind of direction to schools about what the parameters, the limits of their role can be. And I think that my reading is that the amendment essentially is in keeping with the spirit of the Constitutional Court judgments.
You talk about this issue of governing bodies and the power. This has been raised quite a bit, and I remember the former MEC of Education, Brahm Fleisch, was quite vocal on this issue. Is that also not a way of gatekeeping? I mean, every time we hear about the language issue, so this objection, does it necessarily have good intentions, when we're talking about the powers of school governing bodies and their decision making?
So there's been a kind of a contestation around the question of policy, language policy, admissions policy, not just in Gauteng, but across the country as a whole, since 1995, when the first case was heard. It was a case in Potgietersrus. And since then, there's been a whole series of cases that have looked at and understood what the limits and the potential of school governing bodies. And the concern that has often been raised, and certainly goes back to the Potgietersrus case, is that school governing bodies were using admissions policy and language policy as a vehicle for excluding learners. So there's certainly been a historical problem that's been raised. It represents a relatively small number of schools and affects a small number of learners, but it certainly has been one of the main areas of litigation in South African education law.
All right, so Prof, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your input.